Chapter 9. Alex. I managed to drive straight to Houston with a stop at a rest area, and then to get gas at a truck stop that sold food. I had to conserve my money until I could find a place that would hire me. Looking quickly in the help wanted section before I fled Lucas's place, and I took note of bars and restaurants that would be privy to hiring someone who walked in off the street. As I drove watching and trying to familiarize myself to a new environment, I came to the conclusion that Miami and Manhattan had some similarities to Texas, because some of the same people had moved back and forth within this sphere, perhaps because the climate had been similar in Miami with the hurricanes, lots of rain and heat. Not to mention bugs of every kind, and birds of every color. And trees. Lost in my thoughts, I hadn't noticed the police cars. Passing by law enforcement on the highway with them looking around had me nervous, but I tried to stay under the speed limit so as not to call attention to myself. It worked. This wasn't supposed to be my life. I wasn't supposed to be afraid of my shadow and policemen. I was supposed to be home with my children, driving them to school, not on the run like a fugitive. Did I sign up for this when I met Maximilian and his twin? The answer was no. No way. I had no idea a life I thought would eventually be ideal would turn into chaos, and I'd get caught up in the intrigue, the sex, and heaven forbid murder. No young woman envisioned the man of her dreams would turn out to be handsome, sexy as hell, scary as anything, and strange, all rolled into one package, as well as loving, kind, a great parent, and a great lover. That was Maximilian Blackstone. I had everything, and I had nothing. There was too much bundled up inside this one man where I couldn't decide whether to run or stay, and I took the inevitable chance to stay, fall in love with him, and have his children. Now I'm suffering as a consequence of my actions. I never thought about running from him. I fell into his soul, he fell into my body and didn't want to leave. Ever. But here I am all alone without him, my children, or Jonas. However, I didn't leave Max this time. He left me, and now I'm driving around trying to get back to him and my family because it seems the only men I've met in my life are far worse than Max could ever be. In Max's defense, he only did what he thought was best for me and his family, because that was the only way he saw life. Protect his family, and rid himself of men who came between him and me and his businesses. And that's why I'd never confess to Max what Jonas and I had done together. I knew he'd forgive me for marrying that man, but he'd never forgive me or Jonas for what transpired between us, even if Max had been responsible for all of it. He never blamed himself for anything, and that's why I'm conflicted about going back to him. Max would rather I'd given myself to those men than give myself willingly to Jonas. He had to protect me from the other men like himself, and protect his younger twin who had been damaged early on in life, who wasn't as ruthless as himself, but just as lethal when it came to me. My thoughts had consumed me for 200 miles, and now I found myself in Sugarland driving on 59 looking around. But it wasn't a city I thought would suit me because it had too many malls, too many family homes, and right now I needed someplace to work that would bring in a lot of money in a short time without any questions, and without me selling my soul. Passing well-known chain restaurants, I knew from working at them when I was in college, I'd probably get pennies for waiting tables. I needed money, and not a friendly smile. I could get that anywhere, but I couldn't spend a thank you, therefore I didn't stop and continued driving. When I woke from my thoughts a second time in bumper-to-bumper traffic, I had drifted too far out of Houston city limits, and I was on I-10 heading west, when I saw the perfect place and there was a sign blinking off and on. The kind you'd seen in a movie, but instead of "From Dusk to Dawn" the sign flashed "Wanted a Waitress." The sign was on a feeder road at a biker bar named Hell's A Waiting. I looked at the name of the bar as another sign those men were waiting for me, because they were now my kind of people. I'd strangled my young husband, and with Jonas's help threw him into the Gulf. Hell was waiting for me all right. Me, Max, and Jonas. There was no way of getting out of this now, because I was alone, and I had no other choices if I wanted to be with my children again, before I had to make amends for what I'd done. I drove off I-10 and made a left turn at the light, and parked the Jeep with the idea that as soon as I received some decent paychecks, I'd purchased a car that could at least get me to my destination without being pulled over by law enforcement. I'd hoped this would be my first and last try at this bar, because I had a few dollars left for eating and to find a place to stay. Sitting for a few minutes, taking a deep breath, didn't make me feel any better. I had to get my courage together and do it. I told myself, get out, don't sit there shaking. No one is going to come to the car and offer you a job. I'd done far harder things, and this appeared to be easy. Go in and get that job, because your life depends on it. My other half of my brain spoke to me. I was in that fight or flight mode, and I was hoping fleeing wasn't what I chose. I took my palms from the wheel, sucked in another breath before I opened the door. Willing myself out of the car had to be easy, but it wasn't. It was like I was stuck in quicksand until the heat from the day hit me. Then I planted my feet on the cement, took in the music to give me the courage I needed to do this, and I paused before I opened the door. My hands trembled when I placed it on the handle. The loud noises of men chattering, some standing outside near their bikes smoking, the smell of beer and the sound of pool Ks hitting a balls caught my attention. And when I pried open the heavy door, the sound stopped all except the music, and about 20 men turned and glared at me. Pool cues in hand, beers in hand, dressed like the rodeo was in town, and maybe it was. Some wore tight Wrangler jeans, cowboy boots and hats. Rolled-up jean shirts past their thick muscles, showing off their tats where you could see their full sleeve of tattoos. Some of these men appeared to be veterans by their tats and vests filled with badges, and others hanging out after working at the companies I'd passed along the way to Hell's A waiting. I wasn't afraid of them for some reason, because I knew men, and I had dealt with the most dangerous men alive, Maximilian Blackstone and Jonas Blackstone. Although my heart was beating loud, I didn't show how frightened I'd been only because I hadn't had the opportunity to understand men like these. Then I realized that men were men. They just came in different sizes, different colors, but underneath they were men. Men who enjoyed dominating women. I had no thoughts about that because men did what men do, and it was my job to protect myself from them. I knew the type who wore suits by my association with Max and his billionaire friends. Billionaires who worked hard, who had wives they loved but had secrets. Some of them they loved to be strapped down naked and whipped. Most didn't tell their wives of their sexual secrets. No one but Max revealed to me how he couldn't have sex without a crop on his ass. How he couldn't function unless he was inside my body often. These men standing around gawking at me with a beer in their hands were middle-class men making paychecks by using their bodies as labor to pay for all the beer they'd drink, and to take care of their wives and children if they had any left for whatever reason the women chose to stay as I did with mine. These were strong-looking men who didn't depend on a gym membership or their home gym to get those muscles they displayed through taut t-shirts and jean vests without sleeves, where proudly displayed hard muscles and tattoos. I wandered through this throng of men who watched me, probably wondering what I'd do next, and probably speculating why I'd stop there. These were a group of hard men who would fight at the drop of a hat if the occasion called for it. They didn't ride motorcycles for the hell of it. They rode them to prove a point. Anyone could ride in a car, but it takes a certain man to hop on a motorcycle and suck in rain, heat, cold, and bugs. Now I had to decide if I was hard enough to be in their home, away from home. As I strode through the crowd, I hit one on the back, and he turned with a furrowed brow and looked down. Then his eyes roamed up and down my body from my head to my feet. He had to be 6'2", wore a scraggly beard, and aside from that, he was dressed like all the other roughnecks surrounding him, sporting sleeves of tattoos, fresh bruises, and old scars. "Can you tell me who I can talk to about a job? I saw a sign that they need a waitress here." The man with the reddish-blonde beard, and men standing around him with beers in their hands, as if the beer bottle had been an extension of their arms, began laughing. "I'm serious. I need a job," I emphasized. "With those clothes, and carrying that pretty purse, you don't look like you need a thing." "Well, maybe a good." And he palmed his cock. I never took my eyes off him to see where he'd placed his hand. Listen, lady, I'm getting ready to give you good advice. Why don't you go back to your husband and children? This place isn't for you. You let me be the judge of that. And for your information, I have no husband and children. Just tell me if you're the owner and whether you need a waitress. Check with the guy behind the bar. He should be able to help you. That surprised me. I guess if you stood up to a man like that, you'd gain respect. At this point, I was guessing what he thought because he was laughing with the other guys and pointing at me. Thanks. You could have saved me some time, I said, looking up at that big hunk of a bear, who wore biker emblems and something that indicated that he was a sergeant in someone's army. I did notice he'd been in the service, and perhaps that's why he had some measure of civility. When I strolled away, he whispered something, and the men laughed out loud once more. I didn't look back because I didn't care what they said behind my back. I had been through some of the worst humiliation in my life, and this I could get over someone laughing at me. However, on that yacht with Christian, it would take a lifetime to get over what I'd endured. Finally, I had gotten my footing, and I wasn't afraid any longer when I headed straight for the bar, and behind it was a pair of bluish-gray eyes watching me through the mirror. He'd seen me when I entered, I thought. Perhaps he was measuring me to see if I was the kind of material to work in such a place. I need a job, I blurted out, more from desperation and lack of time. Turning around and placing his hands on the bar, then leaning, the striking good-looking guy said, "Do you need a job or you're just slumming? We get a lot of housewives in the area who run away from home looking for excitement, and I guess I'm the first place they stop," he said in a gruff, no-nonsense voice. "You were the first place I stopped, but it's not because I'm looking for excitement. This place is tame compared to what I'm used to." He chuckled. I thought that's a good thing. Now all I have to do is convince him that I can do this job with all these hard-looking men. Have you ever worked in a biker bar? No, don't tell me you have, because you don't look as if you've worked in a bar or anywhere else. Why should I even consider you? Because I need the job. It was the truth. Don't go on what you think I look like, because people are never what they appear to be. You look like a hard ass because you own this place, because you have all those tattoos, but I bet you aren't. Lady. Alex. My name is Alex. Well, Alex, I am exactly what you see. If I look like a hard ass, it's because I am. If I look like I'll fall for a sob story from a beautiful woman, I won't. If you can prove you're capable of doing this job, and not be put off by the hard language you hear, namely the F-bombs tossed around like grenades in a war zone, and by the way, this is just that, and these hard-drinking men who might reach for your ass on occasions, then I'll hire you. How much are you paying? I asked. I had to get that out on the table before we go any further, because I didn't have time to waste. What you're worth. And how do I find that out? If you can bring in a certain amount of tips each night, and the place is filling up, I'll match your tips and give you 50% more. He was right, he was a hard ass. How was I going to do that? Do we have a deal? I had no choice. What do I wear? We have a uniform, but you won't get one until you can demonstrate that you're up to the job. In other words, you have to earn it. For now, wear what you want. What time do I start? Be here by 8 tonight, and one of the girls can help you and tell you what you can do, and who not to do it with. I had no plans on picking up one of these men. The way I felt at this time, if I didn't have to work, I'd go somewhere and swear off men forever. I don't need any help, I've worked in a saloon before. And if you think I'm the type who will date any of these men, then you don't know me. He glanced at me, and his lips eased up to the side with a chuckle. I need to be paid in cash, mister. I took a stance, leaned into him and said, "Can you do that, or do I have to take my business somewhere else?" There was a long stare, and his eyes twinkled when I called him Mr. Most men who were into bondage loved when you called them Mr. I could see his pupils dilate as if he'd just had an orgasm, or was threatening to have one. He narrowed his glance. "Where did you come from, Alex?" Nowhere and everywhere. Once I get paid, I'll tell you where I'm going. Well, Alex, been nowhere and going everywhere, you intrigue me. That's why I'm hiring you. Yeah, that and other things, I thought. But I'm not staying long enough for you to experiment with me. See, I told you, you're not what you seem. I offered him a closed smile, then turned on the balls of my feet, and headed through the cluster of men standing to the side, and I hit the door as I strutted through it to find a hotel for a week. If I could make this job pay off, all I needed was a week. That was the longest I'd planned on working in this place anyway. If all went well, I could work my way through this state, and however long it took, I would get home and hope Max could get me out of the mess he'd put me into. When I climbed into my car, I saw the owner standing in the door, shaking his head and presenting a closed, secretive smile in my direction. I drove away and headed back to the Houston city limits, where I'd passed a number of hotels and motels. Then I saw the perfect one and turned in and parked. Chapter 10. Alex. After paying for a room at the local motel for a week, I'd been happy to get behind closed doors, and then I realized I'd spent far more than I could afford at that Western shop. I checked my purse after sitting on the bed, where I counted a few 20s. That's all. I scarcely enough money left over to buy food. I'd been eyeing the free chicken wings offered at Hell's Awaiting Bar, but I didn't dare take any. But I wished I had now. However, the wings had been sitting in a warmer since lunchtime, and when I stepped inside it had been around 6 that evening, and now I had to be back there at 8, and if there had been any left, I had to be careful eating them. I couldn't afford to get sick. That would mean going to the doctor, and that's what I wanted to avoid. A doctor and a policeman. I'd been hungry, but not as hungry as I thought. I could lose a little weight. I got what I came to Hell's A waiting for, a job and nothing else. I didn't need anyone stopping me or taking a second look and recognizing me from the papers or TV. Jonas had said, when you get what you want, there's no need to complicate matters by doing something stupid to call attention to yourself. Walk away, and that's just what I did. I looked for the door to get the hell out of there before the owner changed his mind. When I'd passed by this motel, I noticed a strip mall that sold Western wear. I wanted to blend in, therefore I stopped. I strode in and perused the aisle looking for something to wear that was different, something I could wear without being labeled as a slut. Although slut was just what these men were looking for, and it might serve me well for a short time. It would certainly boost my tips and shorten my stay in Texas, therefore I bought a slutty long blonde wig, high-heel black boots, and looked for something different to wear besides jeans. Something not so revealing, but just enough to get the men interested. I spotted a picture of women hanging on the wall who frequent the place, and they wore jeans and short skirts, and going on that idea, I found the perfect uniform for Hell's A waiting. A short black leather skirt with a black leather vest and near it a whip. The kind I used on Max when I first met him and fell in love with him. I wore a wig then too, a blonde one. I've gone full circle. Sometimes Max would ask me to put it on to renew our relationship. I always did as he'd asked when we made love, because our love was full of passion and sex then, and we could never get enough of each other. Standing in line, waiting to be checked out, the salesman, engrossed in his magazine, didn't notice me standing in front of him. I snapped the whip to get his attention. He finally looked at me. "What are you going to do with that?" he asked after scanning my purchase. "It's for sale, isn't it? Does anyone ask you what you're going to do with handcuffs, and I see you're selling those too?" I offered him a closed smile. He offered me a twist of his mouth, showing me he didn't appreciate my question. The men I've met so far didn't appreciate women behaving a certain way. That was his problem and not mine. All I wanted to do was to pay for these items and leave, because I was on a tight schedule. They're part of a costume? During rodeo season, you'll see all kinds of things, but rarely do you see women walking around with a whip and knows how to use it. I happen to be an outlier? A what? I like to play with whips. It seems with men and some animals, it's hard to get their attention, I said with a chuckle. I hadn't found anything funny for a long time. Perhaps my sense of humor had come back. Perhaps I was relaxing now since I was alone and had time to think and find myself. The salesman whose badge said Todd, and there seemed to be an abundance of boys named Todd, looked up at me and said, "To each his own. I just sell the stuff. I don't go around looking to see what people do with them." "That would mean you'd be looking through windows." I locked eyes with him and smiled, and he lowered his gaze and found a bag to place the things in after ringing them up. "No. Not me. I'm a God-fearing man. That's the devil's work." "Well, I guess I'm doing the devil's work because I plan to use the whip on Max the first chance I got, and see if that can convince him we were made for each other." I'd gotten tired of fighting Max. One time he would win and then I would, and my children were suffering because of all the give and take. I discovered if I'd lost myself in thought, I didn't concentrate on other things, and that could be bad and good, because I'd driven myself to the hotel without thinking. I glanced down at the items I'd purchased, and realized that I'd paid too much for them. I'd bought those items regardless of how much they cost, because of immediate needs. I didn't take into consideration I'd have to pay for a hotel room, and now I find myself searching around for $1 I may have overlooked in the Jeep. If everything worked out, I could be gone in a few weeks and say goodbye to Texas. What's a few weeks if that will bring me in contact with my children? I thought. "I can do this," I said, after taking a shower and dressing into that tight short leather skirt and vest I'd purchased as an investment. Glancing down and fingering the skirt for a belt loop, now how can I carry my whip without being too obvious? I stared at the clothes I had, then I spotted a studded belt on my jeans, and I slid it out and placed it around my waist. Then looped the whip inside. It hung on my side, and looked like a part of the skirt because they were both black. In the dim-lit bar, no one would notice it if I didn't use it. It was for protection outside getting to my car. I hadn't planned on using that whip unless I felt threatened, or some biker had something else in mind other than a drink. Maybe I should have purchased something lethal, but I didn't have the time nor the money, and I sure as hell didn't want anyone looking for me for protecting myself. I had to navigate around all those bad ideas and try not to cause any attention, which would be hard at that point if I chose something lethal. I couldn't believe I'd found myself in this world of dicey men, and alone. Strolling out of the motel and climbing into the Jeep, I tuned on a news station and felt relieved when they weren't talking about the ex-wife of Maximilian Blackstone. Maybe I'd bought myself more time. I hadn't heard anything about Max either. Before this, and before he could stop me from ruining my life by marrying that sadist, he was always in the news. News about his ex-wife who was thought to be dead wasn't something the great Mr. Blackstone wanted in the news. If it had to do with business, then perhaps I'd see his name plastered all over the papers and in news feeds. But not now. Perhaps he'd paid them off, or reached out to someone he knew at the newspapers to squash the story. Someone in the echelon of business, he had something on. It wouldn't be a reporter, but whoever owned the news stations or papers. When I spotted Hell's A waiting, that took me out of my dismal thoughts. I hated daylight savings time, and this time of the year was no different. It had gotten dark sooner than I thought, and when I drove up, large trucks were parked everywhere. In the parking lot, on gravel to the side of the building, but in front had been reserved for motorcycles. I drove around looking for a parking space until I saw a large Ford F-40 pull out, and I sneaked in. The only problem was I had on heels, and I had to walk to the place and enter through the front door. I was already hungry now and tired after a long drive, and little rest when I reached the front door and opened it. As before, everyone stopped what they were doing and peered at me as if I was a new strange animal at the zoo. I ignored all of that and headed to the bar where there were men lined up along the length of the bar. A barmaid stood chatting with a man who had 2 beers in front of him, one empty, one not, and she placed another bottle in front of him. Strolling over to her while she was busy, I said, "Where's Mr.?" she glanced at me and said in an exaggerated southern drawl, "Honey, his name is Brandon, and you must be the new girl." "Yeah, you don't look like you've ever worked in your life," she said, standing back with a smile. "I can handle the job, just fill me in on a few things because I'm a quick study." "Honey, you won't be studying anything in here except to know who will give you a good tip, and who to avoid. Don't study their faces, don't study their bodies and hard asses, because the face can be handsome, and that's a sure sign they don't have any money. Don't study their bodies because they'll want to fuck you, and you might in your lowest moment oblige them, and then you'll get in trouble with Brandon, or those dudes' wives, and trust me honey, they have wives or girlfriends who'd sooner shoot you and ask questions later." That was an eye-opener to say the least. I wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble seemed to follow me around now. That was far more than I expected, but it was necessary. I recognized the truth when I heard it. When I glanced into her cloudy blue eyes, I saw a lot of bad living and bad men. She probably had experiences I couldn't comprehend, and she was probably trying to save me heartache and time. No one can save anybody from their destiny, and my destiny had been tied to Max and Jonas, and none of these men surrounding me could compare to my two men. Oh shit. I found myself thinking of the Blackstone twins as my men. Not good. I guess in a way, they were mine. I had no thoughts for any other man of any kind, because all I wanted was to make a few dollars and get the hell out of here. "How do you know all of this?" I glanced over at her badge attached to a crisp white shirt. "Candace. Do I look like I was born yesterday, or just fell off the turnip truck?" she questioned. Well, I got what she meant. She wasn't stupid, but I'd never heard that term turnip truck before. Maybe it was a southern thing, or western thing. I didn't know which, nevertheless, I'd never even seen a turnip. That proved I needed to get out more. Chapter 11. Alex. "Why are you late?" Brandon barked, as he moved from the storage room carrying a keg of beer. I turned, furrowed my brow when I realized he was talking to me. I thought it was someone else, but it was me. I knew I had made the wrong impression, and I should stay away from him because he was trying to prove he wasn't easy. Don't let him intimidate you. He does that to all the pretty girls who work here. He did it to me when I walked into the place years ago, when he was a young guy and his father turned over the bar to him. He likes to push his weight around to get women to pay attention to him. Are you two going to talk all afternoon or sell my beer? And what are you wearing, Alex? I glanced down to see what he was talking about. Candace sauntered away and gave Brandon the finger. You said I could wear what I wanted, and I didn't say to change the color of your hair. I almost didn't recognize you. You look different. You weren't born to be a blonde. It doesn't do anything for your skin. That was the point, not for anyone to recognize me, and I think I like this wig. I'll keep it if it changes me this much and pisses him off. I was talking about that costume you're wearing, Brandon explained. You said, Brandon interrupted my answer. I know what I said. But I didn't tell you to wear that short dress and those whorish boots because you aren't that. How does he know what I am? Does he know that I murdered my husband? I bet he doesn't know that. Does he know my ex probably murdered a few men who got close to me? I bet he doesn't know that, or he'd be running from me like his hair was on fire. If you expect to stay on your feet for the next 7 hours, you'd better get some different shoes. Brandon didn't know I'd been wearing boots like these for years. Max would demand I'd wear high-heel boots before we made love. The higher, the better. He'd even ask me to walk around the house with them on when we were alone, and the children had gone off to school. I could walk miles in these and wouldn't break a sweat or have my feet hurt. It was hard walking in flats or sensible shoes. I was trained by the Blackstone men to wear these boots. Did Brandon know that? I bet he didn't. When Max had gone to Asia and Jonas had asked me for a favor, and I agreed, not knowing it was to work for him in his bondage club, I had to wear these day in and day out. Alex. What are you doing with a whip? It's part of my uniform. And for protection, I thought, but refrained from telling Brandon. The place is beginning to fill up now that the word got around that you hired a pretty new waitress, Brandon. They're piling in now, so make this quick. I still have to show Alex the break room where she'll take a break and get off her feet, Candace said, with a smile, and peered at Brandon, staring him down as if daring him to say a word. Get to work, Alex. You have to make some money if you want to get paid, Brandon barked. I was glad Brandon reminded me that I needed to get enough tips where he could match them, and then he could tell if he could hire me or not. I wanted only temporary work, and then I was out of here for good, but he didn't know that. I sold beer and liquor all night, and men stuffed money down my chest and some tried to stick it under my skirt into my panties. I'd been polite and asked them to place it in my bra. It appeared that had been their favorite spot, until I got an unruly, insulting guy who'd heard there was a new waitress at Hell's A waiting had to test his boundaries. He was sitting at the end of the bar, and Brandon had gone to get something in the storeroom. That drunk guy grabbed me by the arm. You're a pretty one. I'd like to eat your pussy, and he placed his hand under my skirt. I knew I should have worn something different, but I hadn't counted on Brandon leaving, or men using their arms like octopuses. Brandon had intervened all night with men trying to manhandle me. It was that kind of bar he'd warned me about. He'd said I was too soft or too pretty to be in a place like this. In my defense, I said, Candace is pretty. But she's in her 40s, and she's not a pushover. What made him think I was delicate and a pushover I didn't know, but it appeared that most of the roughneck men in the bar thought the same thing Brandon did, and the dude eyeing me must have had the same thoughts until I changed that opinion. You're drunk, I said. Why don't you go home and come back tomorrow and we can talk about it? I thought to myself, why am I here? Walk out now while you still have a portion of yourself left. Turning to walk away, the dude, tall and muscular, grabbed me around the waist and pulled me to him. I hit him on the hand, and he seemed surprised and released me. I walked back, and out of desperation or instinct, I pulled my whip from my waist, and before I could think or Candace could say a word, I'd lashed him across his face, on his shoulder and on his back with it. The drunk guy with the foul mouth yelped like a dog who had lost a fight, and was licking his wounds. When Brandon returned, the dude was whimpering and cowering near the bar stool. Guys were laughing and begging me to use my whip on them. What the fuck is going on, Alex? I leave you for a few minutes, and you've assaulted one of my customers. Breathing hard and pissed with the world, I said, your customer tried to place his hand under my skirt. A chorus of men said, leave her alone, Brandon. We haven't had this kind of fun in years. You didn't say you were going to give free theater if we bought liquor. Hell, I'd come more often if I thought I was going to get entertainment too. Alex is all right with us. We were testing her tonight, and she passed, but that guy over there has always been trouble. He's the cause of your barmaid's quitting, and now he's trying to run off Alex, Candace said in my defense. Brandon looked at me, then Candace, and said, Candace, cover for me. Alex, I'd like to speak to you in my office. And you get out of my bar and don't come back, he said to the tall drunk dude. And get someone to drive you home. I strode behind Brandon when he exited the bar, and walked to the back where his office and the break room were. When we reached Brandon's office, he opened the door and walked behind me to his desk and sat. Sit down, Alex. We need to talk. I shook my head because I knew I'd messed up again, and I had to leave without accomplishing my goals. Where did you learn those techniques with that whip? You were a madam, weren't you? I didn't know what to say to him. He'd caught me, and to lie would make things worse. Should I tell him that I'd been sought after for my expertise, and it was a long story? Yes. You're right, and I am, and I won't come back tomorrow. He leaned forward. I don't want you to leave. I need your services, I furrowed my brow. You have me wrong. I don't have sex with men, I tried to protest without telling him I'm a madam, and the wife to Maximilian Blackstone, and no other if you don't count Jonas in that equation. I don't want you to have sex with me. I can tell I'm not your type. It's not that he wasn't my type, he was, but every time I meet any man something bad will happen, and I didn't want to take the chance on something happening to Brandon, especially since I know Max and Jonas were looking for me. I needed to make my way back to my home, to my children, and wait for Max. Not get involved with another man. It's not like that, Brandon, he interrupted, and that was a good thing. I may have told him too much because I was desperate, and I'd done a lot of stupid things out of desperation. Hear me out, Alex. All I want you to do is practice your craft on me. I need to be disciplined. Handcuffs, whips, I can't function unless I can find some relief. I knew a man or men like Brandon, and it was Max, and for his sake, I didn't want to do this, but I needed time. I needed money. This can only be for a short time. Do you agree? I knew by the look on his face that he had found someone who could satisfy his needs and desires, and he wasn't going to let me go as easily as he'd said. We were two people fooling each other. Someone said, it's a double pleasure to deceive the deceiver. However, I had an idea that it wouldn't be pleasurable at all. It would be risky. I agree, Alex. Now when can you start? Not soon, because I have to make a living. You don't have to work here. Work for me. Stay with me. There was no way I'd live with that man. I didn't know him, and once he discovered my secrets he'd wished he'd never laid eyes on me. Pulling out my money from my bra and pockets, I placed the hundreds and fifties on the table and began counting. Can you pay this? I can pay you more, Alex. Just be my madam, and you'd never have to worry about working in a bar or anywhere again. Let's take this one step at a time, Brandon. Match this money and let me get some sleep, and I'll tell you tomorrow. I glanced at Brandon's analog clock on his desk near his computer. He appeared to be a cautious man who hedged his bets. Why else would he bet with me? He thought he knew I would make over $1,000 tonight, but he was wrong. I made that and much more, and he had to pay me, and he did because, as he'd said, he could afford a personal madam who serviced only him. And he wanted to keep faith with me. He needed me to know he was a man of his word, and so far he had been.